Hi, everybody. Shavua Tov. This is Eve Harrow on Rejuvenation for the Land of Israel Network. Hope you're all doing okay. It is August 26, 2018, the 15th day of Elul, 5778. So a whole lot of things have been going on here with me in the last week and a half that I figured I would share with you today. First of all, big mazel tov to our Ari Abramowitz and to Shana, now Abramowitz. It's at their wedding last week, of course, with a lot of the gang from the Land of Israel Network and from other places in my life that I like. What are you doing here? I'm from the bride side. I'm from the groom side. Anyhow, but a lot of joy, really a lot of joy. And we all hope that they build their Bayit Ne'eman B'Yisrael, that they build their Ne'eman, like they're wonderful, they're loyal, they're beautiful house in the land of Israel. And Ari, just it's going to be amazing, just amazing. Known Ari for a long time and couldn't be happier for him. On the other hand, of course, where they're living in Ibei Hanachal is one of the places that at the last second the government struck off the list where Ari and Jeremy are living. Struck off the list of places that they want to develop now. So I don't know exactly what's going to happen with that or the places that they're going to get permission to. I'm sure Ari and Jeremy will be filling everybody in on that over the next few weeks. So, but the main point is that Ari and Shana are married, and we're all like just truly happy for them. Beautiful wedding overlooking the Judean hills. And always, for me, a pleasure to spend some time with Yishai and with Gil and with Josh. Speaking of Josh, he and his wife, Shuli, came on my wine trip, which was the next morning for One Israel Fund, which was, as it is every year, just like outrageous up in the Shomron. This year we got into the lab of Dr. Shivi Drury, who's doing a lot of the research on the wines of the Second Temple. And, you know, like he's showing us little test tubes of like a vine that they found kind of clinging to a rock on the beach. And that's the only one that they know of that particular strain of grape. And they're checking into it. And of course, they have to make sure it doesn't have viruses before they go and move it anywhere else or plant it. Anyway, like really top level research lab in Ariel University. And he showed us where they're going to be soon breaking ground for a $4 million wine research center in Ariel. So it's like just totally the past meeting the future here, of course, in the heart of the Shomron, and with people just who are so devoted to what they're doing and giving out their, sharing their information with others, and a lot of other wineries picking up on that and also creating new old wines. So that was a really fun day. We also found a new goat cheese farm in the middle of the Shomron, like between Eli and Shiloh, that I had found out about. So we went there and actually milked some goats and made some cheese. And it was just, like seeing how communities start and meeting some of the there are no words for it, the very devoted people living in the Shomron who understand that this belongs to the Jews. And, we're going to start off in little communities and then move them into bigger communities and eventually have beautiful wineries. And if we just focus on what we want to do and not so much on what others are trying to stop, those who are trying to stop us, then including, as we have said before, with broken hearts, those in our government or those among our own people, then hopefully with God's help, all will be okay. But we just had a really, really special day. And I'm just so happy. I'm so happy to be a tour guide. I'm so happy to know some of the people that I know and be able to make those connections between others and between, those who live in the Shomron. And it just gives me tremendous joy and really gratitude for what I'm able to do. And the fact that, people are drinking along the way, certainly doesn't hurt. But the bus, I considered the trip a success because the bus came back to Jerusalem clinking with beautiful wines and also honey that we had bought earlier in the day in Beit Choron at a place called Kaveret, clinking its way back into Jerusalem all ready for the holidays. Right? We do a lot of the wine and honey, the wine on the table, of course, as with all our holidays, Kiddush, and the honey to celebrate with the apples, the sweetness of the new year. So all in all, a very successful day, and thank God. Hopefully we'll plan it for another one for next year. But in between weddings and wine trips, I've also been doing some other things. I went up to Har HaBayit. I went up to the Temple Mount about 10 days ago with my oldest daughter. She had never been, and she asked me to come with her. And I hadn't been for a while. So we went, accompanied by, of course, Yisrael Meidad, who has been up there so many times that he's just totally lost count. I'd like to start guiding up on the Temple Mount now. But need to, of course, review it as many times as possible. The history and all that I know, but when you get up there and you see certain things, and it's important to, then of course we go up there under strict halacha, under strict Jewish law, making sure to give a wide berth to the Dome of the Rock and to any place that might have potentially been where the Holy of Holies were. And so we just kind of like walking around the fringes of the Temple Mount. It was a quiet day. There were very few Muslims up there, and therefore the Druze policemen, I think all of them were Druze. The border policemen that accompanied us, first of all, were very nice and also let us have a lot of time up there. We all spent a lot of time looking at our phones, checking our email. You're not allowed to bring any kind of prayer book up there. As a matter of fact, my daughter had just like a little pamphlet with her that looked to be some kind of prayers or holy text, so they took it away from her when we went up. But we managed to, because of applications, we were able to spend a lot of time on our phones checking our email quietly and with a lot of concentration. And so it was very meaningful, as it always is, painful, as it always is also, that this is the best that we can do and that we have to be humiliated like that. But slowly, the situation is definitely much better than it was in the past. Maybe we just got lucky on that day, or a combination of both. I read that I think it was over Shabbat, a soccer ball landed on Jews praying at the Western Wall at the Kotel below the Temple Mount. In addition to the fact that it could have been bad, that somebody would have gotten hurt, there is a strict rule that you're not allowed. I mean, you'd think you wouldn't have to have this rule, right? You're not allowed to play soccer on what for you is supposedly one of your really holy sites, Muslims. Okay, so clearly, A, it's not necessarily one of their holy sites, or B, their version of holy is a little bit different than the rest of our version of holy. But it's another break of the law. It's another it's another way of humiliating us. You realize that, and I speak about this so much, though, that idea here in the Middle East, that so much of what happens here is simply about humiliation and making the other side feel bad and therefore making yourself feel good. But it's not just like the bully on the block. It has really big ramifications. And unfortunately, when we take the humiliation, it's not just seen as, okay, so they're like sissies, right? But it emboldens the other side to want to humiliate us even more. And of course, the ultimate humiliation, thank you, Moshe Dayan, is after the tremendous God-given victory of 1967, that we relinquished our holiest site to people, and now to others who feel that we have no rights up there whatsoever. And now we have to fight our way just to, even have like a few minutes to say some prayers. And that is hopefully something that will change. And it's changing from the bottom up, from people who go and just insist that it remain in the understanding and the consciousness of the Jewish world. I had got letters after I posted that I was up there, so I got people saying, but how can you go? And the rabbis say no. So there are some rabbis that say you shouldn't go, and there's others, the rabbis that I follow, who not only don't say no, but they say yes and now, and as often as possible, because we also have to show that we care about the place. And there's enough evidence and enough research, despite all the destruction that the Waqf is doing up there. And every time, Yisrael Meidad was telling us, every time they go up there, there's been something else that's been disturbed, some other mound of dirt or something else has been moved in order to destroy any evidence of anybody but Islam being up there. But we have to keep going up and making sure that, so there's enough evidence, to finish my sentence, that we know where we can and where we cannot walk. And most of that plaza was nowhere near the temple. But it's complicated, but we all have to do something. Again, my mantra, you guys know it. What are you doing? No sitting on the fence. Because if you're not doing something positive and not something to rectify the humiliation that all of us in the West are suffering, and more on that in a few minutes, then you're allowing it to happen. And the forces are arrayed against us are quite high. So a little segue here before I talk about like the serious things, and so the lecture that I was at on Friday and the Farhud, the day after I went up to the Temple Mount, I went skydiving. Yes, you heard correctly. Me, not like an 18-year-old, but I went skydiving. My youngest daughter's boyfriend wanted to surprise her for her birthday, and he asked me to join them, which I have to say was probably the best part of the entire day. And for those of you who are listening who have older kids and understand that when your kids or their significant others ask you to do anything with them, you go, because you don't take that for granted, that they want you involved in their world more than tangentially or with the wallet open. So that's why I found myself a few years ago going scuba diving, getting my scuba diving certificate in Thailand, because another daughter of mine on her way back from India after the army asked me to join her there. So even though that wasn't anywhere Thailand on my bucket list, I toddled over to Thailand and had an amazing time and loved scuba diving and wish I could do it more. So as I've talked about over the years, I've spent my 50s now getting over myself and getting over my fears in many different ways. So just to tell you how freaked out about it wasn't even on my bucket list. Okay, like the zip lining in Costa Rica was on my list, and I did that, and the whitewater rafting that I did with my husband in Montenegro earlier this summer, that was also something that I wanted to do and to get over that, and that was amazing and great fun. But skydiving was so out of anywhere. Forget comfort zone. It wasn't even in my discomfort zone. It wasn't anywhere on my map in my head of anything that I wanted to do, because that is insane. And so when he asked me to join them, I said yes. And it was a few weeks ago, and I had a few weeks to like push it out of my mind. And then the day came. So all the way up north, because it was at the beach at Habonim, which is a beautiful beach in Israel. For those of you familiar with the land, between like Caesarea and Haifa, that part of the country. Also, incidentally, the part of the country where Israel's offshore natural gas is supposed to be is like directly opposite that in the Mediterranean. And the environmentalists, and I totally understand why they're so worried now, are fighting the pipeline being brought close to the shore. Really what has to be done is the work on the gas, whatever they have to do to the gas, distill it, or I'm not a gas person, is supposed to be done very far offshore, because any kind of problem or leak with it will totally destroy the coast. But in order to protect it, the Israeli Navy has asked that that whole whatever plant be brought closer to the Israeli shore so that they can better protect it. And as a result, it's endangering the coast. Any kind of mess up there at all will totally destroy the coast. So now I understand how that was one way. That was one aspect of the skydiving, was understanding now from above how beautiful it is and pristine, and how I totally get why they're upset and totally want to help them with that. I don't know if there's anything they can do, because they're up against big companies and the army, of course, which has its point. And I don't know if they're going to be able to succeed. I don't agree with everything environmentalists do, and sometimes I think that they go overboard when they like try and save a butterfly, as beautiful as it might be, but when you need development for something else. But in this case, I do totally get it. But like I said, they're up against some crazy forces. But getting back to the skydiving itself, so the whole way up there, I was like, my stomach was in knots. My daughter was she had no idea where we were going. And she's sitting in the back seat until we get to the parking lot where the sign is. And then she realized what was happening. And I jumped out of a plane at 4 kilometers height, 12,000 feet above the earth. By the time that you see the movie and you get all the hadracha, they give you all the guiding. I used to think I would know that word, right? They tell you what to do and how to, how you're supposed to keep your hands and your feet and what you should do here and what you should do there at different parts of the fall. So saw that, nervous, and my daughter and son-in-law and 5 of my grandchildren came to watch also. As my son-in-law said to my other daughter's boyfriend, "Oh, wow, you're not even in the family yet, and you're already getting to throw her out of a plane." That was sweet. In any event, but then I just calmed myself down for a couple of reasons. One is because fear is all in your head. It's like totally on your head, and I, at least in this case, it is. It was not a rational fear. I was strapped to somebody, adorable incidentally, and he was taking care of opening the chute and all that. There was nothing like I had to do, like to remember to pull the ripcord. I didn't have to do any of that. I was really, just like kind of a passenger on this. But there were a couple things that went through my head as we're walking towards the plane. One is that what a joy to be able to do this with my daughter, who hasn't always had such an easy time in life. And here for her birthday, I am joining her and her boyfriend. And it was just like, if you'd asked me a few years ago if this day would ever come, there's no way that I would have said that it would. So there was it was just like tremendous gratitude again, that meeting point of yirah, of awe and fear. So when I moved the fear, I moved the fear away by replacing it with the awe, with the wow and the thank you. And I can't believe that I'm here and that I have this opportunity to do this with her. So that was one. And the other one, and I'm possibly the only person that had this thought, but it's okay. I thought about Chana Senesh. I thought about the paratrooper who in Israel, it's pre-Israel, was living there in Sdot Yam. If you're familiar with the song Eli Eli, she wrote there, and she was living there, and she was parachuted behind enemy lines during World War II in order to try and save the Jews of Hungary from the Nazis, and she was caught, and she was murdered. She's buried on Mount Herzl. She was only 23 years old, and I was walking towards the plane. I was thinking, wow, she was a paratrooper. That means that she did this. Like, she jumped out of planes, right? That's usually not the focus with Chana Senesh. Usually the focus is on her bravery and how here she was safe in the land of Israel, and she volunteers and pays for it with her life to go and save the Jews who are suffering in Europe. And I thought of her as I was walking to the plane, and how she must have practiced. She must have jumped right near there, because that's where she was living, and that's where she would have learned to be a paratrooper. And so here I am going to also jump out of a plane, and she never got to do this with her daughter. And my daughter is almost the age that Chana Senesh was when she died. And getting on the plane, I thought to myself, okay, Chana Senesh, this one is for you. This one is for your sacrifice. I'm doing this to have a good time, and you did this to try and save other Jews. So I'm going to be thinking about you, and grateful to you and everybody in that generation for the fact that I can, in a free and amazing Jewish state, I can do this. I can take a day and go skydiving for fun with my daughter. So I got on the plane, and now I was totally calm. And we're climbing, and I was calm until I was the second one off the plane. So I was calm until the first one's off the plane. They open the door of the plane, and they're there in the door, and then they're not there anymore. But there's no time to not be calm, because you know exactly where they've gone, which is flying, like catapulting their way down, right? And then suddenly we're at the door of the plane, and I have to admit, then I shut my eyes, okay? So the actual jump out of the plane, I did not see, although that was probably good, because I didn't have a reference point for how fast we were falling. And it was 50 seconds of total free fall, 50 seconds of going very, very, very fast. But we're very high. And so it's not like the earth is like suddenly coming up towards us, because, yeah, it's getting closer, but we're so high that it doesn't seem as far away as it is, as that we're that high. But it was probably good that I shut my eyes then, because speaking to my daughter's boyfriend afterwards, he didn't. And you're kind of like a banana, like you're facing up. And so he saw how quickly the plane was moving away from him, or how quickly he was moving away from the plane. So that gave him that reference point of how fast he was moving. So I didn't have that. Opened my eyes right away, though, and saw Eretz Yisrael from a perspective that I have never seen her. And yes, I have been obviously on airplanes, and I've flown over the land as I'm taking off or coming back home. But to see it that quickly and the changing that quickly, right? And to just be in the air with nothing around me. to see the sea and to see the beach and to see the mountains of the Shomron and Haifa. Can't see the whole country, but saw a good part of it. And just like that was those were my prayers that morning was, wow, thank you, Hashem, for giving me an opportunity to see this beautiful land from yet another perspective. And thank you for this being home, and just thank you for everything, for my being able to do this in every other way. And it was just one of those like wow moments. I'm just the whole way down saying, Ribono Shel Olam, Ribono Shel Olam. And then 50 seconds later, he opens the chute. And then we got to talk, and he's pointing things out to me, and we went into a cloud. He said, "Do you want to go into that cloud?" I said, "Sure." And we floated into that cloud, and I had control of the parachute for a few minutes, and all too quickly, it was over, and we were down on the ground. But I'm still flying. It was an insanely wonderful experience on so many levels. Not the least of it is that I did something that I was so scared to do, and I did it anyway. And it was just amazing and safe. And my grandchildren who were there on the ground think I'm just like the coolest grandmother ever, which also doesn't hurt. And it was, thank God, it was just another, you can add things to your bucket list afterwards, right? Like it wasn't on your list, but then you put it on there and you can give it a check at the same time. And it was, wow. So if you get a chance to do it, and someone afterwards told me all these horror stories, and this one got hurt and this one that, I never felt for a second not safe. And I know that it was because I was with Israelis. I have to say that, there's certain things that in this country are done half-assed or not so well, for sure. And I've heard way too many times, Yeh tov, yeh beseder. It will be okay. It will be fine. And corners are cut. But these people were so professional, and I never for 1 second felt unsafe, quite the opposite. And I have to say, I've said it before, that if ever I'm in real trouble, and obviously jumping out of a plane of your own volition isn't real trouble, right? But if I'm ever in a situation, earthquake, tsunami, or whatever it is that happens all over different places, I will not feel that I'm going to be okay and that I'm in the hands of people who know what they're doing and will do everything to help me until I hear Hebrew. And then I'll know that I'll be okay. There's just that sense that the people at the top of the pyramid here in Israel in terms of safety and all that, and helping other people in crisis, whether it's, Magen David Adom, the ambulances and coming to help you, or whether it's, like I said, the Israel Aid or the unit that Israel has that goes all over the place in the world to help people wherever some natural disasters happened, or even not natural disaster, like, the Syrians that Israel is still taking care of, the people who've been so horribly hurt by their own in the north, and Israel is still taking care of them. Got an update about a hospital in Nariya, still full of refugees who can't go home yet and who are being given the top care in Israel. So that segment of Israeli society that is so selfless and so well trained, there's nobody like them in the world. And again, there's a far difference from being, like trapped under rubble in an earthquake or perched on the top of who knows where waiting for help in a tsunami, than jumping out of an airplane. But that same sense of complete and total confidence in who I was with and that he was going to get me where I needed to go safely was right there. And not a second. And that's also something, because essentially I was putting my life in somebody else's hands, somebody I'd only met a few minutes before. But it never occurred to me for 1 second that he wasn't going to do everything that had to be done and do it right. And I was, trust. And that kind of trust also, jumping out of a plane, trusting somebody, was also something that was important. There's times that you do have to trust other people. And what I found that week from certain things and certain give and take that I had with somebody in my life who has over and over and over proven to be toxic for me was also in some way jumped out of a plane. All right. So that was a week of like trusting, of letting go, of saying like, this is something that I'm going to do. I'm just going to jump. And so maybe it wasn't a coincidence that I did that in Chodesh Elul, in the month of Elul. Sometimes you just have to put your faith out there and jump. And I think that is going to help me in other parts of my life, where you just do it. You just don't overthink it, and you just do it. I tend to overthink a lot of things. And so that was very freeing for me in many ways. I remember, Oy lo aleinu, it shouldn't be on us, but reading about, I think it was Emmanuel Moreno's widow. He was one of the heroes of the Second Lebanon War in 2006. And I think maybe just recently they've now published his picture, but he was involved with so many clandestine activities and had saved so many lives, and he was killed in Lebanon. For a long time, they didn't publish his picture because it would have endangered others. But I remember reading an article about his widow, who was left now with, I think, 3 or 4 young children. And she brought herself, she was devastated. She could not get out of bed. But she brought herself back in her head to a time when she was younger and more carefree. And I think she'd gone bungee jumping or something similar. And she had also been scared. And then she had just jumped. And she brought herself back to that place where sometimes you just have to push yourself to do something and to just get over that fear. And she was lying in bed, worried about her children, and of course missing terribly in grief, missing her husband who had just been killed. And she brought herself back to that mental place, though, of just pushing past yourself, and she got out of bed. And so I should never have to do it for a tragedy, and I should never have to do it, please God, for something terrible. But who knows? There may be a time in my life coming up where I'm going to be afraid for something real, not something I've chosen to do, something that's been happened to me without my choice, and I'm going to have to come back to that place where I push the fear aside and I jump. And so maybe that's why I did this. I don't know, or maybe I just did it. That would be great, just to have a really great time with my daughter and appreciate that. Maybe. I don't know. When you look back at your experiences in your life, then you realize that not everything or most things weren't what you thought they were going to be at the time. So putting that in my bag for the future. And in the meantime, just wanted to share that with you. If you have a chance to do it, obviously in a safe way. Wow, I cannot wait to get back up in the air. All right, there were certain things that I've done that was it, and I don't want to do them again, like the Tarzan jump in Costa Rica. Absolutely no intention of ever doing that again. I hated that. But this I would definitely do, and now I'm like bugging some of my friends, and like some people, come on, let's go and do it again, because it was really, really awesome. And anyway, if you want to see the video, he had his GoPro on his wrist. So if you're really all that excited or bored with your own lives, I could share that with you. Oh, so I do want to thank, getting back to serious stuff, I want to thank David Zahner, who has been listening. He told me he's been listening to my show for, like a decade in all its different versions. And I spoke about my trip to Croatia a couple of weeks ago. We took a little break from my world and went into Jerusalem's Botanical Gardens last week. I hope you enjoyed that interview. Anyway, so he is a semi-neighbor. He lives over in Neve Daniel in Gush Etzion. I'm in Efrat. And so he listened to my show, and he said, if you haven't seen it, and I hadn't seen it, you have to read this book, The Farhud by Edwin Black, Roots of the Arab-Nazi Alliance and the Holocaust. And he said there is an extensive chapter also, even though it's about the Farhud, which, as you guys should know, the summer of 1941 and the pogroms against the Jews in Iraq. But that's while World War II, of course, the Holocaust is going on in Europe. But he said there's a chapter on Croatia and on what they did there. And I am ashamed to admit that I didn't know enough of this. I knew some of it, and that's why I had shared with you guys that I was bothered by the Jewish tour that we took of Dubrovnik. For those of you who didn't hear the show a couple weeks ago, we took a Jewish tour of Dubrovnik while we were there. And I was bothered by the narrative that the guy was giving us because he was kind of like making excuses, and it seemed to be a little bit of revisionist history, or a lot of revisionist history, about how there were only a few bad people in Croatia and really they were given a bad rap. Oh no, not according to this. And I'll just read you very, very briefly, page 325 if you're interested. Sometimes, and I'm reading here from the book, The Farhud by Edwin Black. And now that I've read it, and thank you, David, so much. See, guys, I learned so much from my listeners as well. And he even brought the book over to my house, like totally full service listener. Amazing. Anyway, sometimes history must apologize to the future for recalling the gruesome realities of the past. The Holocaust is among the most horrid of historical events. But within the hierarchy of hell, the most ghastly niche is reserved for the fanatic Croatian nationalist known as the Ustasha. As the depraved and grisly details are recalled, history regrets its duty. This book is really well written, by the way, I have to say. In a realm where the horrific is commonplace, the wartime history of Yugoslavia is the most disturbing of any in Europe. Yet comparatively little is known or published about the bloody events that pitted Catholic Croats against Serbian Orthodox in a world of ethnic cleansing that assumed unspeakable dimensions of beastly violence. Many historians are hesitant to even describe the ethnic and nationalistic rivalries, the blood-curdling atrocities committed, because the documentation is so sparse, contradictory, confusing, and impenetrable, and is so intensely politicized. Okay, now this is me talking, and I've been reading from the book, so now I feel a little less bad about the fact that I was semi-ignorant about some of these events. Shifting alliances, collaborations, and cross-killing among the rival groups occurred at a dizzying rate. One day, ethnic partners massacred a third group, and the next day they turned their still sanguinous knives on each other. Much of the record and testimonies in Serbian or Croatian, making the killing chronology even more inaccessible. All right, but there's certain salient facts, of course. Like, again, this was also a result of the world's dividing things up after World War II in just a way that had nothing to do with the ethnicities of the people. And I'm skipping a couple of pages. Cruel and inhumane as the Nazis were, they retreated in wide-eyed astonishment when they learned of the joint Catholic-Muslim Ustasha atrocities. Okay, the things that were done there. If the Germans are saying that these places are the epitome of horror, the most wicked concentration camp of all must be Jasenovac, where no ordinary mortal is allowed to peer in. That is the one where the Jews of Croatia were taken. So it was the Jews and the Gypsies who were completely helpless and powerless. And the book goes on to talk about the killings that happened there, and it's even just hard to read. I can't imagine what actually happened there. It goes even beyond what we read about in terms of the Holocaust. And of course, though, and what is so important in terms of us here in Israel as well, is that the mufti of the Husseini here in Israel was hand in glove with these people. He was over there, he left here, he was over there, and there's no question that the evil that we're facing here now, of course, was part of that 70 years ago. And they weren't just sitting here. The narrative of the people here so often, meaning the so-called Palestinians, is they were just sitting here peacefully minding their own business when the Jews were having a rough time of it, to say the least, from the Germans and from the Nazis, came over here and proceeded to do exactly to them as had been done to us. And that is maybe the biggest lie that's ever grabbed the world. But the Mufti was there. He was fomenting a lot of the trouble and making sure that the Muslims were also part of the killing. And as we've said before, even developing a concentration camp for the land of Israel near Shechem, had Rommel not been stopped in El Alamein in North Africa. And so much history here. Another phenomenal book to be reading, The Farhud by Edwin Black. I highly recommend it. And that's what we're still suffering from today. So much of that marriage, that nationalism, and the marriage of using religious ideology in order to advance politics. On Friday, just 2 days ago, I was at a fascinating lecture that I'm actually going to develop. I was going to talk about it today, but I think it deserves a show of its own. It was about Egypt and Gaza. Tour guides we should anyway, the good tour guides are constantly taking courses to keep ourselves, as you guys know, to keep ourselves abreast of the newest information. And so on Friday in the Ministry of Tourism, there was a course for tour guides. And as I mentioned on my Facebook page, I still cannot wrap my head around the tourism ministry, Yariv Levine, trying to open up the tourist field to just anybody and to not just people who are licensed. None of us have any idea why he's doing this, why he's trying to destroy one of the most praised fields in Israel, the tour guides. I'm not saying this to pat my own back. I'm saying that we study very, very hard. When we're not out guiding, we're studying and learning on our own time so that we can better distill this country and give people proper information. And not Pollyannish, but actually the realities of what's happening here, because so much that happens here in Israel affects people all over the world. It's really astonishing how so many things start here and then go every place else. But one of the things that, of course, started here in the Middle East, not in the 20th century, but about 900 years ago, 1,000 years ago, was Saladin, with the Ayyubids, and he's the first. He unites the Sunnis, initially against the Shias, but then against the Crusaders, against the Christians. And it's really first against the Christians that the term jihad is employed to mean a religious holy war, and not just the fight within yourself, like the Jews are doing here during Chodesh Elul, the fight within yourself against being a good person and against your inclinations to do things that are wrong. And jihad then becomes a holy war against infidels. Up until then, Christians and Jews, as people of the book, had not been seen as people like the pagans for whom war has to be fought and who have to be stopped and to be murdered. And now it starts with them, and then it moves on into towards the Jews, and that's where the Mufti pops in as well, and creating, piggybacking on the nationalism and on the pan-Arabism, on the humiliation that the Arab world has been feeling for hundreds of years by the West that's come in here, specifically the British. Wow, the more that you learn about the British and their mucking around, the more you realize how much blame they deserve for a lot of the wars and like millions of people dying. All right, they 100 years ago, a little more than 100 years ago, find oil in Basra, which is now Iraq. They want to get it to the Suez Canal, right, which they built in order to power the boats that are going up and down the Suez Canal, bringing things from India. And so that's also, as a small sidebar, that's why they don't want the Jews who are, fighting for what has been promised us, by the same British, incidentally. They don't want us to have the Negev, because the Negev, or southern Israel, is right where that pipeline can go through. And so just so many lies and manipulations in order to get what they want for Britain. It's really astonishing, and it makes me feel bad because I want to like the British, and as individuals, some of the British people that I know are just absolutely delightful. But as a country and what they did as an empire, and we're now, and it's going to take a long time, if ever, to pick our way out of the situation that they left the Middle East in, not just because of oil and because of wanting it for themselves, but even before that, what they did with Egypt and controlling Egypt. Wow, it's just astonishing. So we had this whole lecture. It was a 5-hour lecture, which I'm not going to be able to distill into just a few minutes, but those were like the high points that I got out. But also really the ijtihad, the closing down of Islam that happened so many hundreds of years ago. And so they found themselves, the distance between them and the Western world, and people who are moving along in the civilizations that are actually being good for their people, that gap just widens and widens and widens and widens. And they see that, and that's something that they're fighting against. And that marriage, that very dangerous marriage between the ideology, the religious ideology, becoming a religious imperative to force the Westerners, i.e. Christians and Jews, out of here. And now even more so with fundamentalist Islam and with ISIS and the Muslim Brotherhood and the Salafists and others of that ilk, the need to foist their ideology in the religious world upon the whole world, not just to get the so-called infidel out of their world, but to move into our world and to take over and do the things that they want to do. And we're seeing that in Europe, and we're seeing that, of course, in other places. We've talked about that a lot. So in this lecture that was titled about Egypt and about Gaza, even though he spent very little time talking about Gaza, but mainly about Egypt and the history of Egypt, and you see those patterns and you see those very dangerous situations, and still happening again here, of course, with Hamas, and that Israel is coming maybe to some kind of, it's not a peace treaty, but just some kind of a deal of quiet for a little while, and who knows where that's going to end. And does that mean that they then use the humanitarian aid that the world wants to bring into Gaza, the world including Israel? Nobody likes seeing starving people, and nobody likes knowing that there are people who are really suffering not so far away from here. It doesn't make me happy at all. But they are being ruled by a bunch of just horrible people who are using that humanitarian aid for their nefarious ends. And so, that May 14th was just an excuse. The move of the embassy to Jerusalem was really just an excuse for something that had been bubbling for a long time. And that, as Clausewitz said, that war is just diplomacy by other means. And that's exactly what's happening here. and has for a long time. The Yom Kippur War was possibly could have been avoided, and so many people who paid with their lives for the misread of the map. But it's very hard to know. It is so hard to know. On the one hand, we left Sinai, and so the sign is terms of our peace treaty with Egypt, because they needed every grain of sand back. And the Sinai Peninsula has now turned into a terrible place. It was a wonderful place under Israel of beaches and of scuba diving and snorkeling and developing the reserves that were there. And we left Sinai, which put Israel in a terrible place during the 80s financially, because we left the things that we had developed, the oil fields that we had developed, and our economy took a tremendous hit, which was so difficult for a long time. But worse than that, the Sinai has just turned into terror central and a terrible place for everybody living there. Sufis getting killed there, hundreds of Sufis last year. But not just that, it's really a place where terrorism has entrenched itself, and now Israel and Egypt have to deal with that. So, but maybe because of the peace treaty with Egypt and leaving Sinai in 82, so maybe we haven't had a full-fledged war, and maybe thousands of Israeli lives have been saved because of the peace treaty, even though it certainly isn't a peace treaty the way those of us would like it to be. Not a warm feeling in Egypt among the people towards Israel, far from it. Now things are okay because with Al-Sisi we have mutual interests, and that's what it's all about. So it's so hard to know. Sometimes in retrospect, it's pretty clear that, for example, leaving Gaza was not the smartest thing that Israel ever did, that the Oslo Accords have to rank high as absolutely like a crime against its own people, what the government did at the time, and where we are now with Oslo. But then there's other things that aren't so clear, like, again, as I said, the peace treaty with Egypt. And I spent a lot of time in the Sinai as a student here at Hebrew University in 79, 80. And I won't go there now, not for safety reasons, but because it hurts me that we left. But on the other hand, like I said, we don't know about the war that wasn't fought and the people that didn't die, and that's a huge thing. So it's not always clear, even in hindsight. And it's still playing out. We could say that the situation with Egypt is in hindsight, that we're still smack in the middle of it. And that would be quite true. So I'm going to now, my interest has been piqued about that, about it, not just Egyptian history, which was totally fascinating. And I knew a lot of that already, but the whole trail that's leading us up into here today and the internal battles that have been fought in Egypt. So whether I get the guy who gave the lecture on Friday himself or somebody else who is as knowledgeable. So that's also now on my list for things to do on this show. But it's been an interesting 10 days, as you can imagine, on so many different levels, on a personal level, and on, there's never a dull moment, shall we say. And if there's a dull moment, then we try and make it a little more exciting. But that's going to be it for today. I have to get going with my day and a busy week coming up. So I hope I piqued your interest in a few things with today's show. I hope you all really have a safe week, a wonderful week, a week that you end with more knowledge and accomplishments and better human connections than you have today. That would be a good thing. It is, of course, Chodesh Elul. It is the month of introspection and of trying to clean the slate for the last year and getting ourselves ready for the next year. And that's always super important. And I'll thank you for continuing to tune in and to allow me to share with you some of what's going on with my world here in Israel. And as always, very grateful for being able to do what I do. And thank you so much, as I said, for tuning in, and to Tabitha and to Ben. And you can be in touch with me, eve@thelandofisrael.com. You can also check my website, which is in the throes of being updated. I just have to put more time into that. evehara.com for my upcoming trip to the States, October, November, and where I'll be. Delighted to see you if you will be where I will be. And other trips that I'm planning for further on into the year, for March and for May. Things that are already on the calendar. So take care, everybody. Be safe, be well, and learn about things. Step out of your comfort zone. You don't have to jump out of a plane to do it. Eve Harrow, Rejuvenation on the Land of Israel Network. Take care, everybody. Goodbye for now.
Throughout history, says His Imperial Majesty Haile Selassie. It has been the inaction of those who could have acted, the indifference of those who should have known better, the silence of the voice of justice when it mattered most, that has made it possible for evil to triumph. Well, I'm definitely looking to defeat evil and bring the light of good into the world, because I'm Rav Mike Foyer, and this is the Jewish Story.
Join Rav Mike Foyer for the best Jewish history podcast, The Jewish Story, on the land of Israel.